I'm going to tell you, because some of you know my story, some of you may have forgotten it. I want to go into it for a little bit of detail real quick. So, I'm from Germany originally. I look Irish. I'm not. He looks very different to me, yet we're related. Yeah. I asked my mother if she was the milkman. She said no. I didn't use those precise words. I just said the milkman, wink. She said no. Or whatever variation thereof in German. So I came to Ireland in 2013 for a karate seminar, Kempo Karate, and we met in the Mount Wolseley Hotel. 40 people got together. It's in the middle of Ireland. It's in the middle of nowhere, right? People got together, trained together, because I was training 4 to 7 times at the time, 4 to 7 times per week. And I met somebody, and I was so deprived of female attention at the time that I didn't go through a process of creating options for myself. There was one lady who was interested, and she was basically hitting on me, right? So I was like, oh, well, this is great. So I immediately jumped into a 1-year-long distance relationship with her. I moved to Ireland, we spent a couple of years, and we got married. And it sounds like a Disney story, but it really wasn't, because there were a lot of things that were wrong in that relationship. She wasn't a bad person. She was a really, really good person at heart, a little bit difficult. And our values weren't aligned. And that makes it difficult, because if you don't find somebody who you're aligned with in terms of what you want physically, which is something most men have been trained to be ashamed of. In our society, we're not even allowed, so most of us have been made ashamed of having physical preferences, right? Oh, you're just superficial. No, physical preferences matter. They're not the only thing, and subjectivity is definitely real. But if you're not with somebody who you're physically attracted to, at some point you're going to look around, you're going to keep looking around, and so many women you'll meet are going to be more attractive than the person you're with. So physical attractiveness is definitely one of the things you should evaluate for, ruthlessly. So I didn't do that, it wasn't my cup of tea. And values-wise, we couldn't have been more apart. Personality-wise, obviously there was some degree of overlap. And also what you have to understand is she had a much stronger frame. We're going to talk about frames in a couple of minutes on what that actually means. And I was basically, look, you got to understand, in any social interaction, one person is usually more reactive to that person than that person is in reaction to them. In almost any social interaction, that's the case. Now, that's obviously only one way of looking at it, and that can drift into a very manipulative direction, which we don't want to go in, but it's very important to keep in mind. So I was very reactive. Most men in relationships, they're either slaves or tyrants. I would say most men are slaves in relationships, where they don't feel like they can communicate their needs. I sometimes say they're cucks. Right? And not in the literal sense where you're watching your wife get down by another man, but in the sense that you can't communicate your needs. And if you don't communicate your needs, what happens? You experience one of the 3 most dominant negative emotions, which is anger, depression, or anxiety. One thing that happened for me was around half a year or so after we got engaged, I started having panic attacks. And I never had that. I thought that's for losers. I thought anxiety was for I never had that. Just weak people. Someday I'm sitting there on the bed with her, we're having some argument, whoosh, this way. Anybody ever had a panic attack? Like a real one? Like a real one. If you've never had it, you don't know what it's like. It's the worst thing you could ever imagine. It's the worst thing. I've been in a lot of physical pain, I don't think anything came close, because you think you're broken from the inside and you don't even know how to make it stop. Whoosh, like a wave, and you feel like you're a victim to it. Now, back then I didn't have the tools to stop it immediately, and there's ways to stop it. But at the moment, I thought I was psychologically broken. I didn't even know what was happening. I couldn't really speak to anybody about it. I'd be there, just my brain was zzz, like that for months and months and months. And never did I question that it could be because I was about to commit my life to somebody who wasn't right for me. So that kept happening, and I lost a lot of weight, and I basically suffered a tremendous amount. I'm not saying that to come across like a victim or to get compassion, not at all. But in my role, I have to acknowledge that men suffer in relationships. Women suffer as well, for sure. There are plenty of men who treat women like and that's not what we want to do. But men also have their suffering. And whether it's passive-aggressive, some men, they get passive-aggressive, others get depressed, others get anxious, right? Whatever your favorite flavor of suffering is. And every single one of you has a favorite flavor of suffering. When you're suffering, it's either anger, it's usually a sense of feeling down, or it's fear. You can eradicate all of that. I mean, you're all going to experience it at times, but you really don't have to stay there. But I experienced ton of that. And so basically I stuffed it down, I had conversations with family members before the wedding, some of my friends. Adam also said, David, do you think this is really a good idea? You should get married. I was like, well, I don't want to talk about this. Whenever you're not even willing to have a conversation, that's an indicator that something is rotten in the state of Denmark. He asked me, another friend, are you sure that's a good idea to get married to that woman? Yeah, it's fine. If you're not even willing to question something, there's something where you're not in alignment with yourself. So wedding comes, All well and good, almost have a panic attack during the vows, just kind of like keep stuffing it down. The next day, I'm driving my mother, my brother, and his ex-girlfriend at the time back to the hotel where they were staying. Halfway through, I'm like, my throat is getting kind of dry. Maybe there was something wrong with the salmon. Can't breathe. Panic attack the day after the wedding. I stopped. He's laughing his ass off. He's laughing his ass off. It wasn't funny at the time. Call the ambulance. Ambulance goes, no, your airways are perfectly clean. You have massive levels of anxiety. I was like, what's that? All right, okay, I never heard of that. Because in German, we don't have that term. Anxiety doesn't exist. Anxiety is the same word as fear. So it's like, fear? What fear? That's different, I don't understand. So anyway, the weeks that came after, because there was like 10-day period where I stayed at my, back then, wife's parents' house before we were to go on a honeymoon. And I was feeling so horrible because I didn't take care of a lot of the things that could have made me feel better instantaneously that we're going to talk about today. I just didn't even know what was happening to me. And then I couldn't communicate my needs to her because I've never learned to communicate it. That's not her fault. I assume responsibility for that. Now, if you're looking back at past relationships, it's very important to also place some responsibility on the other person, not so you blame her. But some of you here have the habit of feeling way too guilty for things that you shouldn't feel too guilty about. So it's good to assume responsibility first, but no matter how thin you slice it, there's always two sides to it. So honeymoon comes, I'm suffering, and at some point I'm just like, I'm getting vertigo from anxiety, like really bad, until I'm like, okay, f this. So I'm in San Francisco on my honeymoon with my wife while she's in the bed, or she's not wanting to me. So I'm sitting there, and I contact a psychotherapist in Ireland. It's like, just Google. Okay, cool, that guy, looks good. Anxiety specialized, cool, let's do it. And I started 6 months of EMDR. EMDR is a really, really cool process that basically sucks the anxiety out of your brain. It's one of the very few things that's proven for PTSD and anxiety. And some people who have a really, really, really hard time getting over a breakup, we're going to talk about how to get over a breakup here today. And I'm going to give you a lot of valuable strategies that are going to cut it for 95% of people. But for that 1% of people who really can't get over a breakup, there's almost like this little bit of trauma release. EMDR can be super helpful. So that normalized my brain a little bit. I mean, I was still myself. From the outside, you weren't able to tell. But on the inside, my brain was buzzing. And so that helped me. And then the most important thing happened. So I was working for a big tech company at the time. And then I met somebody's going to come later, who basically was in this dating space for a long time. He ended up sitting next to me in that company. He was a peer of mine. And he'd been active in this space for 5 or 6 years at the time. And he could have been a dating coach himself. He's just not as much of an attention as I am, wanting to have his face all over social media. He's a little bit more private. But he basically became my mentor. So eventually I end the marriage with my ex-wife, which was one of the hardest things I ever did. Because even when you realize, who here's ever had that? You want to end the relationship, but you just can't get yourself to do it because you don't want to hurt her? Anybody ever had that? Right? Interesting, huh? So that took months and months to be able to do that. And then when I actually ended it, I thought she would break down crying. Well, it was actually. Obviously, it still hurt. It's not good for either one of the people. But that night, I go to that friend of mine, my mentor, and then we basically, from that point on, start going out. And he starts teaching me things. It's like, okay, you can actually approach. You can text girls. And I was pretty good at written communication. I went to university. My English is pretty good. But just because you're good at written communication or verbal communication doesn't mean you're good at texting. But not just you. Everybody sucks. Just to different levels. You're just like next level. Yeah. It's just like, he's actually really good in person. It's just like his texting is actually we'll call it creative, right? It's hilarious, man. But I suck too. I remember being in the office with my mentor and be like, here's this girl, what do? I got her number. And he goes, take care of that. I had no idea of structure, so that's why we developed the texting framework over the years. Because I sucked at it, because nobody's good at texting. Nobody who thinks they're good at texting, nobody's good at texting. And you've all seen that. Because texting is such a unique context. It's not like in-person communication. It's not like in a bar. It's not like emails. It's very unique. There's rules that you didn't even know exist. And so he helps me with that. We start going out. And in the beginning, I have a big mask and stick up. Imagine me for you guys, back in the day it was tramline, right? Ever been to tramline? Like on a Latin night and some Latin pub. And I'm talking to the Spanish girl. And in the beginning, I couldn't even approach. And then I'm talking to her about IT infrastructure. I was like, this is a cloud. Ever heard of Salesforce or customer relationship management tools? She goes, boah, Jesus Christ. Nice to meet you. I'm going to go meet my friends now. Ever heard that? Nice to meet you is the biggest insult known to man. But after around a couple of weeks of going out, I'm talking to a different girl, and I must have ignored all of her signals for, 20, 30 minutes, and eventually she grabs my face and she goes, "Are you gonna kiss me or not?" I was like, "All right, okay." And that was the first time I ever kissed a girl the day I met her. If you grow up a ginger in Western society, you don't necessarily consider yourself the pinnacle of male attractiveness. But that was a moment where I realized, oh, I actually could. Because up until that point, the only people that I saw making out with girls in clubs or bars were like boys. And I never considered myself to be a boy. I never wanted to be a boy. Little did I know. No, I'm joking. No. I'm joking. Exactly. No, I'm not. Exactly. The furthest thing from it. So, but that was a moment when I realized, okay, you can actually create that connection out of nothingness. You can walk up to somebody and actually make it happen, not be drunk, not be, and then kiss her, and then get a number and schedule a date and go in a relationship. So I saw this girl that I wanted to go and approach, and it took me legit an hour and a half and 2 beers, 2 gluten-free beers at the time, which still contain alcohol. And so I walk over to her, and this was in Germany. In Germany, people speak German. People talk to each other in German. But I walk over to her and I ask her in English, because I was so scared, "Excuse me? Where are the toilets?" And her reaction was literally just like, I've gotten that look from a girl. That look was enough for me to have like a feeling of, wasn't a panic attack or anything, but it was like embarrassment and shame and blood was rushing into my head. You know this feeling when you think everybody's staring at you and you're utterly embarrassed? You fart in school or something like that? It felt like that. And so that's when I kind of stopped, because it scars you, as you're saying. It doesn't actually scar you. But if your mindset isn't on point, if you place way too much importance on this one particular interaction, then it's going to scar you. But how mind-blowing is that? I remember when I realized you can actually just approach somebody, I remember the first one. The first daytime approach I ever did. It was still daytime, it was dark, it was getting dark, it was like 5 or 6 p.m. after work. I remember I'm standing there at this corner and I'm learning about this, and my mentor has been telling me things. And I was like, okay, that's the opportunity. And she was actually very attractive. She was way too attractive to be my first daytime approach. And so I walk over to her and I'm like, you're waiting for the taxi? Horrible opener. But anyway, still managed to carry the conversation, was fine, was good, exchange Instagram, go on a date, make out with her, that's it, go on a second date. Basically, I end up with her while her dogs are on the next to the bed, like trying to bite my off right there. But it was an interesting experience because it's not about the sex. The sex is completely secondary. Sex only matters when you don't have it. Sex is only really, really important when you don't have it. That's when you pedestalize it. Otherwise, it just becomes quite normal. But what it realizes was sex isn't even that important. Sex is not the end goal. That's where I'm different to pickup artists. Because these pickup artists, they say, just as many women as possible forever. No, sex is the precursor to a relationship. If you can't make sex happen, you can't make a relationship happen. That's why it matters. Oh yeah, I'm gonna wait. No. There's only 2 ways to approach this whole sex subject. Either you're so religious that you wait before marriage, and that's fine, and then you both agree, and that's a very narrow target audience, a very specific target audience. Or you say, okay, I'm gonna engage in normal Western dating. We're usually on the 2nd or 3rd, sometimes on the 1st date, we're gonna have sex. And it matters because the probability that she's gonna meet you again, if you is a lot higher. That's why sex matters. That's the only reason. No more, no less. It's not that big a deal. But for me, that was a crazy moment because what you have to understand is, I was talking to Zozo about this, and Fernanda, I was like, when a woman chooses to spend a Tuesday evening by herself, she does so by choice. If she goes to bed by herself, she does that by choice. And we're all, well, that's quite something. She could at any given day of the week have a different man with her. No? Right? She's like, what? Basically. But that's not an abundance that we have. And basically what I want you guys to become is I want you guys to become women. I want you guys women in the sense that you feel the abundance, that you realize, whoa, there's more options than I could ever deal with. And then you pick the best. Not the best out of all the possible options, but you choose somebody. And so when I started going out, it was really like I could see the Matrix in a sense that, whoa, men are walking through life, not approaching. They're not starting conversations like our grandfathers, great-great-grandfathers, great-great-grandfathers did. Yeah, you could make an argument that for them it was easier because they all lived in a social circle and they were all kind of cousins anyway. In a way. But really, it's true that if you notice, okay, there's an approach, and obviously everybody gets rejections, but what I always say is out of 20 approaches, you're going to get 1 to 2 dates. 20 approaches will lead to 1 to 2 dates if done correctly. If you don't let it scar you so much that you don't do it forever, and there's best practices. And that was really one of the most beautiful things. Once you actually understand how awesome that is, you won't even need alcohol anymore. Who here has ever done a daytime approach, got a number and got a date from it? Isn't it fucking amazing? Isn't it a much better high than alcohol? Because it's earned. Anybody can drink alcohol. That's easy. That's the same with tattoos. Not tattoos, if anybody has tattoos. I like tattoos. I think tattoos are cool. But one of the... But tattoos are unearned. They're not earned. It's unearned pleasure. Alcohol is unearned pleasure. It's very easy to do it. Anybody could do it. But an approach, difficult. Okay? You did both, so it's all right. It's okay. But it's really beautiful. You step out and you can see, whoa, that's crazy. Because then when you have that abundance, you can start to negotiate for your needs in your relationship. And if I had just communicated my needs to my ex-wife better, I would have never been in that situation. Granted, I was very young, so I don't place any real too much guilt on myself for it, but I can saw what led to it. And so yeah, then I start going out with him, and then over the years, I learned from a lot of different people. I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, but my family, they work in the medical field, so I had access to some amazing people, like Gunther Schmidt, who I was able to learn from, one of Germany's best psychologists. So I had them as teachers, which is kind of like more mainstream, like hyper advanced, but more mainstream. And then on the other hand, you have pickup artistry. And a lot of that is weird and manipulative and just wacky. But nonetheless, we're intelligent people, so we're able to have a nuanced discussion. There are things here that are absolutely true. This idea of a cold approach, it sounds so weird, but it actually just means I'm going to introduce myself. Words really have a meaning. So I realized, this extreme end is probably whack, because most men get their dating and relationship advice either from pickup artists who tell them to as many women as possible, or from the mainstream which says, just be confident, just be yourself. Yeah, just be confident, just be yourself is the same thing as being just be rich. Yeah, but how? What the does that even mean? You know these people who post inspirational quotes on Instagram as a meme, but they actually live in their mom's basement? It's exactly that type of applicable advice. It doesn't really help you. So then I basically, I don't know how many thousands of women I approached over the coming years, learned from a lot of different people. And yeah, so I always loved coaching. I was coaching karate at my university, started helping people in Germany and in Ireland first. And then as social media grew, now worked with men from over 30 countries. Help them find someone, get a better dating life, get more high-quality male friends. And that's kind of how this whole thing has come to pass. And part of the reason I love it is because it has, one, such a deep fundamental impact on people's lives. Who you can already feel how it's having a massive impact in terms of how you express yourself in general. That you express yourself with more ease, not just in your dating and your relationship life, but in other areas. Because most of us, remember how I was talking to yourself about the constriction before I found out that you actually have a soldier voice? Yeah. Remember? Like this vocal, so you say you're just like, you're being nice with us because no, you didn't use the word peasants, you said civilians, exactly. Yes. But most of us are actually very, very constricted. And when you can overcome that, that's actually a really, really beautiful thing. And so it has such a beautiful impact because when you just express yourself more freely, you communicate your needs. And the only way to get your needs met is to communicate them. And if you want to be happy, you have to communicate your needs. So it starts with an expression. So we're going to do exercises today that are going to be a little bit intense, that are going to help you, because it's not just a cognitive process. Elliot Holtz, anybody know Elliot Holtz? Nobody. Wow, you, okay. Okay, so Elliot Holtz used to be a legend in the YouTube space 10, 15 years ago, in the bodybuilding space and in the spiritual space. And he talks a lot about bioenergetics and about physiological holding patterns. So what holds you back is not just a thought, but it's also a habit of how we express ourselves physically. So we're going to work on that. So it has such a beautiful impact because not only do you end up in a relationship, but you can actually communicate your needs. And you can give her the chance to communicate her needs either. Because a lot of this red pill talk of alpha, tough guy, a lot of that is nonsense. Some of that is really important because it's a counter trend to the stupidity of feminism. But it can go to an extreme as well, where people say, I've heard this quote, I don't know who said it, but it's really brilliant. Anybody who pretends to be a full-time tough guy is a part-time liar. It's really true because we all have masculine and feminine energy in us. And that's what this masculinity movement forgets sometimes. We all have masculine and feminine energy in us. And if we block out one, well, that's an issue. Most of us here, we are born or we live too much in our feminine, so we need to get more of that masculine energy, because Tony Robbins says the death of all relationships is depolarization. What that means is, if there's not two polarizing energies of masculine and feminine, the relationship dies. Women feel most at home when they're in their feminine. But for her to be in her feminine, you have to be in your masculine. What does that mean? We're going to look at that in detail later. So this job that I have, it's very meaningful because it has such a powerful impact, but it's also fun. You guys know from the cult. It's a lot of fun. Going out and seeing, I get to talk about dating for a living. That's pretty cool, right? And yeah, exactly. Right? So it's nice. So that kind of in relation to the journey.